Today, we're diving into something that, at first glance, might seem boring. Like, painfully boring. But don't zone out just yet. Because this quiet, unassuming thing, it's actually one of the most powerful forces in the global economy. It's the invisible glue holding entire governments together. And yet most people couldn't explain what it is, how it works, or why the world depends on it. We're talking about government bonds. Yes, bonds. The nerdy cousin of stocks. The background character in every economic story you've ever skimmed through. But here's the thing. Bonds are not background. They're central. They're critical. And they're deeply misunderstood. So today, we're going to fix that. Let's start at square one. What is a bond? At its core, a bond is a fancy IOU. You give money to someone, usually a government or a corporation, and they say, thanks, I'll pay you back, plus a little extra for your trouble. That extra is called interest. That's the deal. Clean, elegant, kind of beautiful in its simplicity. So why does the US government sell these things? Because the US has bills to pay, and it doesn't always have cash on hand. Imagine wanting to buy a PS5, but your paycheck doesn't hit until Friday. What do you do if you really want the PS5? You borrow the money. Same with the government. But instead of video game consoles, the spending list looks more like this. Social Security and Medicare, the world's most expensive military, interest on existing debt, yes, we borrow to pay off old borrowing, infrastructure like roads, bridges, and broadband, education, and emergency responses like the pandemics, wildfires, or bailouts. So when you buy a US bond, you're essentially funding all of that. You're saying, here, take my money, just give it back later with interest. Simple, right? Now let's ask a bigger question. Who's actually buying all of these bonds? The short answer is everyone. The long answer is more interesting. First, foreign countries. China and Japan are two of the biggest bond buyers. These countries export massive amounts of goods to the US. Think electronics and cars, manufactured stuff. In return, they get US dollars. A lot of them. And instead of letting those dollars sit idle, they reinvest them into US government bonds. It's a win-win. They keep their currencies weaker, which keeps their exports cheaper and more competitive, and they earn interest on dollars they were holding anyway. It's part financial strategy, part diplomacy, and part economic hostage situation. Because the more US bonds China holds, the more invested they are in making sure that the US doesn't crash and burn. Then there's the Federal Reserve, the US central bank. The Fed is the single largest domestic holder of Treasury bonds. It buys bonds to stabilize markets, to control interest rates, and to manage economic crises. During turbulent times, it launches programs like quantitative easing, where it buys loads of bonds to pump cash into the financial system. This is how the Fed props up the economy when things get shaky. Next up, pension funds and insurance companies. These players love bonds. Why? Because they're safe, predictable, boring in the best possible way. They provide slow, steady income over long periods of time, which is perfect for institutions that need to pay out retirement benefits or cover insurance claims. Regular Americans also own bonds, whether they realize it or not. If you have a 401k, an IRA, or any kind of retirement fund, there's a good chance it includes US Treasuries. Bonds act like a financial seatbelt. They balance out the riskier investments and keep portfolios from going full roller coaster. And of course, we can't forget about the hedge funds and institutional investors. These guys use bonds in all kinds of strategic ways: hedging risk, managing liquidity, arbitraging interest rates. Bonds are chess pieces in a much larger financial game. Even state and local governments get in on it. When they're sitting on extra tax revenue, they want it somewhere safe. So again, bonds. Why do all these groups buy US Treasuries? Because they're safe, because they're liquid, because they're in dollars, because they help diversify portfolios, because they're required by regulation, because they're reliable. But here's where it gets interesting. The more bonds the government sells, the more debt it takes on. And if interest rates rise, the cost of servicing that debt skyrockets. It's like only making the minimum payment on a massive credit card bill while the interest piles up faster than you can say fiscal responsibility. There's also something called the crowding out effect. When the government borrows too much, it can soak up all the investment dollars in the economy, leaving less for private businesses. Startups, tech companies, innovation, all of them end up competing for the same pool of capital. And if investors are getting good returns from government bonds, they might decide to play it safe instead of backing bold new ventures. That's not just bad for the market, it's bad for innovation. Now let's talk about the global side of this. The US doesn't just export goods, it exports dollars. Every time a foreign country buys US bonds, they're buying future dollars. That creates demand for the dollar itself. But if tariffs go up and trade slows down, there's less reason to hold on to US dollars. That means less demand for bonds. That means lower prices, higher yields, and more expensive national debt. It also creates volatility. During the Trump administration, tariffs were slapped on over 50 countries. The intention was to bring manufacturing back home and punish unfair trade practices. But the side effect? Trade wars, higher prices, rising inflation, and spooked investors. At one point, the yield on 10-year treasuries jumped to 4.5%. The 30-year saw its sharpest rise in decades. The bond market panicked. And when that happened, the Trump team started dialing back some of those tariffs. Because when investors lose faith in US bonds, they look elsewhere, to gold, to euros, to Swiss francs, to crypto, anywhere they think is safer. And when that happens, it's not just about bonds anymore. It's about the entire US economy. Higher bond yields mean higher borrowing costs for the government, for corporations, for everyday people. Higher borrowing costs can slow down growth, increase unemployment, and trigger recessions. And if foreign buyers stop trusting the US to repay its debts, we could lose the dollar's most important superpower, its status as the world's reserve currency. But what does that mean? It means the world trades in dollars. It holds dollars. It prices oil, food, and weapons in dollars. That gives the US unparalleled leverage, economic, political, and even military. But it also means the US doesn't get to mess around. The global financial system depends on faith in the American stability. If that faith cracks, even a little, the consequences could be massive. A weaker dollar could lead to soaring interest rates, collapsing markets, and a shift in global power. The euro could rise. The yuan could surge. A whole new monetary order could emerge. And it all starts with those little slips of paper called bonds. Bonds aren't just investments. They're trust. Institutionalized, monetized, and globalized. They're the foundation of modern finance. They affect your mortgage, your student loans, your job, your retirement, your groceries, your country's strength, and its weaknesses. So the next time someone says government bonds, don't shrug it off. Lean in, ask questions, understand what's at stake. Because those boring little bonds, they're steering the ship. And right now, the waters are getting choppy.